The Crusades were called in 1095 as an effort to aid the then waning Byzantine Empire in reclaiming Near Eastern territory in the name of Christendom. The call to action spread further than expected, and rather than rallying a few reinforcements for the Byzantines, mustered multiple independent Christian armies to reclaim these lands for themselves. In 1098, the first Crusader Kingdoms or Crusader states were established in Edessa and Antioch by the knights Baldwin and Bohemond. The Crusader Kingdoms of Tripoli and Jerusalem would follow, being somewhat consolidated under King Baldwin. However, he would pass away before he could secure his kingdom from neighboring threats, and despite the church calling for additional crusades, the Crusader kingdoms over the course of approximately 2 centuries would wither and disappear, being consumed by the larger Islamic presence to the west and east. But what if the story of the Crusades didn't stop there? By the time the Crusader states had fallen, a massive Mongol realm had come to stretch from East Asia to Eastern Europe and Anatolia. Hey, we could do something with that. What if in an alternate and, let's be frank, totally fanciful timeline, during the last decades of the Crusader states, their populations weren't killed off by Islamic forces or left to flee back to Europe, but were instead taken captive by the Mongols and settled on the far eastern border of the empire, for some reason. Hello audience, Mr. Z here with a really just for fun alternate history scenario today. If you're new to the channel, welcome and stay tuned. If we wanted to justify this somehow, the Mongols, as per their policy of religious tolerance, did have a noteworthy Christian presence in the Far East, though one which lacked infrastructure and means of developing into something more prominent. Kublai Khan felt that fostering support from Christians and earning their favor within the Khanate was imperative to winning over the Christian lands of Europe, and would even request that the Pope send 100 men to the Far East to teach European religion and science, though this never manifested. We might also suggest that the Mongols believe having a European population along the Levant would constitute a fifth column that the mainland Europeans would continue to supply and send support to, and just decide that it's better to have them as far away as possible. The Mediterranean breeze is a bad influence on the Europeans, so maybe the Pacific breeze will be different. Plot twist, it won't. Japan at this time would have been experiencing its Kamakura era, a great period of political and social upheaval that saw power shift from imperial authority in the capital to the decentralized authority of the shogun and the military lords below him. This was the beginning of Japan's feudal era, and much like the lords and knights of Europe, Japan saw the rise of its daimyo and samurai. Japan was also undergoing a religious transformation with what might best be analogized as a light reformation, given the emergence of new schools of Buddhism and their prominence among the upper classes, with efforts to spread the faith to the lower classes, who were more likely to practice Shinto or folk religion, albeit with Buddhist characteristics by that point. By this point in time, the Japanese would have survived 2 Mongol invasion attempts sent by Kublai Khan. While the first invasion was believed to have simply been a reconnaissance or raiding mission, the second invasion appeared to have intended for the establishment of a permanent Mongol settlement within Japan. However, a heavy storm had wiped out the Mongol navy and forced a retreat. Plans for a third invasion were considered, though never manifested. But this time, things are different. Now before we go any further, let's take a moment to thank today's sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive free-to-play vehicular combat game ever made. Play multiplayer matches using 2,000 incredibly detailed tanks, airplanes, helicopters, and ships in dynamic PvP matches on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. Making use of multiple immersion levels, there are a variety of playstyles to suit your desires, along with an in-depth customization system to make your vehicle your own. I'm personally a big fan of the detail that went into crafting the vehicles and environments. Even the damage sustained by the vehicles are impressively detailed to where you'll notice actual effects on the vehicle's performance based on where it was hit. Follow the link in the description to get a free bonus pack on sign up, including multiple premium vehicles, a premium account, boosters, and much more. Now, back to the video. The Crusaders, seeking better conditions for themselves and the tens of thousands of captives taken from the Levantine coast, offered to spearhead a third invasion of Japan in exchange for the right to rule the island semi-autonomously as vassals of the Khan. Having resorted to enlisting prisoners in his previous invasion attempt, and recognizing the opportunity to gain a foothold while Japan was still internally divided, Kublai Khan would authorize the Crusader proposition and provide them additional forces from Korea and China before committing a greater number of Mongol soldiers to the expedition. Forces which in our timeline would have been directed toward attempted invasions of Burma, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And so the Crusaders set off to carve out a new promised land where their people could once again be free, defeating the Japanese in several intense battles. A Mongol foothold is established in the south of the Japanese island of Honshu and the islands to its south, placed under the direct authority of a Crusader king, naming his realm New Jerusalem. Needing to learn the customs of the Japanese populations they now presided over to better rule them, and to better proselytize to them, the Crusaders quickly adapted to the ways of the Japanese and formed alliances with local lords. The Crusaders would establish churches, schools, and care centers for the poor in the fashion of the Knights Hospitaller to offer a supportive hand to Japanese civilians and bring them into the faith by peaceful means. Meanwhile, other Crusaders took to spreading the faith by force, waging battles against warlords and granting freedom to those willing to convert and join their ranks. In our world, Christianity saw noteworthy success within Asia. During this time, missionary Giovanni da Montecorvino is said to have converted some 6,000 individuals in the span of only a few years, and if we fast forward, we find that when Christianity was introduced by the colonial powers, the faith spread so quickly that the Japanese and Chinese governments were forced to take active measures to suppress it. It's also worth noting that the largest rebellions in the histories of both Japan and China were religious rebellions led by Christian converts. Without centralized governments willing to take an active stance against Christianity at that point, the Crusaders would see much success in establishing Christianity as a prominent and eventually dominant force within Japan. The advanced military tactics and technology they brought with them from Europe, the support of the Mongols, and the effectiveness with which Christianity was spread throughout the Japanese islands soon allowed the Crusaders to unite the warring states of Japan under their centralized rule. The Mongols, impressed by the success of their vassals, sent more soldiers and resources to aid the Crusaders in solidifying their control of Japan. With the help of their new Japanese subjects, the Crusaders built a powerful kingdom and established Christianity as the dominant religion, infusing the larger Japanese culture with strands of European culture. Mongolian control of the Silk Road allowed the Crusaders to facilitate a form of minor trade and communication with the rest of Europe, and as word of this isolated European colony in the Far East circulated around Europe, calls intensified for an expedition across the Atlantic to reconnect with the Crusaders. With Spain having yet to unite into a single state, France would take the helm of Atlantic exploration, claiming the Crusaders of Japan rightful subjects of the kingdom on account of its prior relationship to the Crusader states. However, Kublai Khan would have passed away only some years following the successful conquest of Japan, and a gradual decline of the wider Mongol Empire began during the otherwise peaceful Pax Mongolica. Mongolian tolerance of religion allowed the Crusaders the perfect opportunity to spread their faith beyond Japan and into Korea and coastal China without facing repercussions from imperial leadership. The eventual outbreak of the Black Death is something of a wild card for this scenario. It's questionable if the plague had ever made it to the coasts of East Asia, as despite the claim that the plague originated in China, recent studies suggest a more Central Asian origin point. There doesn't seem to be any record of a plague reminiscent of the Black Death in China around this time, which would naturally suggest that the plague only spread westward from Central Asia and would thus not impact Japan in this timeline. The exception we could make being that increased demands for Western trade by the Crusaders would lead to a greater risk for the plague to spread eastward, but even then it may simply not be as widespread as it was in the West, where plague-infected bodies were effectively used as weapons by the Mongols against Western armies. If plague were to reach Japan, that would almost assuredly wipe out the majority of the Crusader population, who would have been concentrated within large settlements and cities susceptible to the spread of plague. However, the imprint of Western culture and of Christianity would still be left on Japan, reminiscent of the imprint of Norman culture upon Anglo-Saxon England. If plague didn't reach Japan, the Crusaders would be among the few European populations left unaffected by the plague, and though they would continue to remain an ethnic minority within Japan, their population would continue to grow steadily, and efforts at spreading Christianity across East Asia would continue. The rising dominance of Christianity would likely spark resistance from local religious populations. However, again, with the success Christianity saw in Asia during the 1800s, it's reasonable to assume it would eventually grow into a major force within East Asia, which would in time likely come to blows with the Muslims of Central Asia. And you know what, I think that's just where we'll leave that. See you in a few months when this becomes a video game mod. Thank you all for watching, like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more. Mr. Z, out. Once again, let's thank War Thunder for sponsoring today's video. Follow the link in the description to get a free bonus pack on sign up, including multiple premium vehicles, a premium account, boosters, and much more.